So we got another interesting deal here today. I know everybody's been asking about absentee, semi-absentee, quote unquote passive income deals, and so I don't want to go into the commercial real estate stuff. So I found this one, which I thought was kind of interesting. Same day expedited delivery services. So this is the guys who go last mile and stuff like that, often for Amazon or for anything like FedEx or otherwise that's expedited or same day delivery. And this one is apparently run semi-absentee. I will say right off the bat, the biggest orange or almost red flag for us is California. California is not a great state to be a business owner in. I'm sure there's some California people that'll watch this and might want to say otherwise, or they're just going to concede because it is not a great state to be in. But it's a really interesting deal because of how they're proposing to structure it, which is not far off from what could be a good deal. So let's go through it here. They're asking $6.5 million. They have a cash flow of 1.2. They're making 3.2 in revenue. Obviously, we don't know whether all this stuff lines up, as I always say, but their profit margin is probably about in line with what I would expect for this type of company. A little bit higher. I would more expect around a million, so about 35%. But they're close. Their numbers look pretty close. But here's the interesting bit. So they're asking for 6.5. Their cash flow is 1.2. Yes, they're asking for a very high multiple, but they're stating flat out they're looking for a 4.5 down payment. So they're already structuring on $2 million of this to be seller finance because they've either been educated by the broker, which is possible. Sunbelt's a pretty decent broker, not great. Sorry if you're a Sunbelt dude watching this, but you're better than the average. Uh, and so they've probably been educated that an SBA buyer is going to be quick and easy compared to someone who's going to have to go and do the SBA plus a conventional. And now all of a sudden, your buyer pool goes down significantly. So the broker or whoever has advised them pretty correctly, this is a good way to structure it. And obviously, seller financing is the only way you're going to get this type of multiple on this type of business, because typically, when you're dependent on another business's route, so this last mile, same day stuff, you're dependent on someone else, right? If they all of a sudden don't want to use as a contract, you're out the door. You're screwed. Now it's rare unless you completely screw up, and so here they even say their on time performance is 98%. I wouldn't say that's great. That's probably above average, but it's not like exceptional. But it's probably good enough that they're not going to get kicked out anytime soon. And they've operated for 10 years. So, there's some good foundation here. Now, one thing, this definitely, I would expect, and this is why I said the broker likely educated them, but then the seller decided to not be educated. Seller finance with an interest rate over 5 years, an SBA is probably not going to do this deal. They're going to say, hey, either delay the interest or it's got to be over the course of the loan, beyond the loan, whatever it is. And with the multiple they're asking for, the numbers aren't going to make sense, as I'll show you in a second, if you structure a deal like this. But, and this is probably the broker really forcing it, the amount financed and terms will be dependent on the purchase price and the quality of the buyer. So you coming in, showing that you know your shit, talking like I do on these videos and just saying like here's the brass tacks of what it's like, or how we do for our partners, will make all the difference in the world in this deal. But overall, it is a pretty interesting deal, right? They have good amount of contractors. There's a lot of risk diversity. It's a pretty big size business. The only thing that they're not really specifying anywhere here is what the value of the fleet is or how they're paying for their fleet in order to do these deliveries. But they are already set up as semi-absentee, at least as they say. Obviously, it has to be investigated. But if that is the case, the numbers and everything on this deal do make a lot of sense. This one, though, is probably the biggest red flag that I have of this entire deal structure is pursue other interests. That's fine if it's a fully absentee owner. Like maybe they, when we're talking about something like laundromat, an absentee owner, there's already someone managing it, stuff like that. Great. Like if you want to go and pursue other interests, that's fine. And if the year over year numbers look flat, that's perfect, right? That's fine. This has already been the beaten stepchild. You're buying it at the beaten stepchild price, but you're paying a high multiple here. You're going to have to look at year over year. And if year over year doesn't look flat, that means he got it ready to sell, and now it's starting to be the beaten stepchild. So when you finally close the deal in 3 months' time, 4 months' time, um, I mean, you might have a massive decrease in both, delivery performance, in sales, in revenue, in profit, and it can be on a very fast path to go really bad for you. So things to look into. This one for me is not quite a red flag, but enough of a flag that I then need to immediately know that I got to look at financials. If they've been static, great. That generally means this has been the beaten stepchild, and I'm good to go ahead and look at it and value it accordingly. Where there is good potential that it can maintain, and then I can come in and improve and have some juice for the squeeze. But if I see continuous growth and then year to date looks static, I know I'm entering into a deal where I'm going to see a 20 or 30% drop year one, easy, if not more. So you got to make sure you structure for that. Now let's look at the financials here. So this is the listing scenario. Basically 6.5 asking, 1.2 cash flow. Again, this isn't the hard cash flow that has to be calculated when you get all the financials. They're asking a 5.4, which is very high for businesses of this type. Most of the same day delivery, last mile type stuff I've seen is like 3 times, maybe 3.5. It more depends how it's being operated. If they already have a GM and now they're absentee, they're pushing 3.5, 4. This one, semi-absentee, they're asking way more than they're valued at, to be blunt. But because they're willing to do seller finance, there's some balls to be played with, right? There's some wiggle room on how you want to negotiate here. So finance amount, they're basically asking 4.5 million gets financed, and you have a DSCR 1.5. Like the numbers work out enough that you can make this deal work. If you're an absolute specialist in this and you just want to acquire the book of business and you think you can come in and do a lot of good things, I mean, maybe you can make this deal work and it would make sense. The reality is they've structured this for the SBA, so they know someone's not going to come in and be completely genius at this type of business. So this is more, if I was looking at this deal, what I would look at structuring. I would either mess with the multiple, but in messing with the multiple, I know that they're going to push crazy on the seller finance and structure and all this other stuff. Or what I would do is push the seller finance with standard terms, 0% interest, in excess of the 5 years, in excess of the loan, that type of stuff. I would push that and increase the seller finance and focus on just making sure that I can lock in 10 years of high debt service. So that way I know the business can sustain. I can stack cash during those 10 years. And at the end of that term, whether it's 7 years I paid off, 5 years, however long it takes to pay off the SBA, depending on what I decide, I can then go back to the seller and say, hey, you're holding this note for 3 million. I can pay you over the next 5 years. You can be 15 years in total on this loan, or I'll pay you half. I'll pay you 1.5 and I can pay you cash today. Take it or leave it. And now I can renegotiate the seller finance after the fact, because reality is this gets amortized the same way a loan does. That's really how seller finance works. So the value of getting more seller finance is when they're finally at the point where you can start paying it, you get to renegotiate it. And now you're doing it from a position where you're sitting on a lot of cash. Like, I mean, if I do this, if I did this deal and I did it well, I could be sitting on probably about $4 or $5 million in cash, and I can pay 1.5 or $1 million in cash, get a massive discount, and effectively still, buy the business at a reasonable multiple at that point, right? It'd be 3.5 plus 1.5. You're buying it at 5 instead of 6.5. Or I can just pay him out. And he just says, just keep paying me. Cool. I'll pay this out over 5 years, 6 years, whatever it is. And by that time, the goal, obviously 10 years down the road is that, or 7 years down the road, whichever it is that you're going to be doing more, right? You're not going to want to be static at 1.2. You should ideally be 1.5 to 2.5, depends on how well you grew it. So that's what I would go after, is either a scenario like this or a scenario where you get this push down. This is going to be much harder to negotiate, more than likely, where you get this push down to a reasonable level, right? Like 5 million high end, or maybe even like 4,750. And now you're in the right wheelhouse. You can be okay with taking, $1.5 million in seller note, another zero there, and you can still debt service well, right? Or even take $1 million in seller note, and now you're in good standing there. So either way can really work, but usually when a seller has put a price like this, you're asking to discount $2 million. It's not really going to happen, right? So you're always better off playing within the terms of what's flexible, and what is more likely to be achievable, which is usually, how do you adjust your seller finance? How do you pay off with an earnout or profit share or whatever else? Something that still gets them to this number that's in their head, but gets it to them to a point where you can adjust that around later down the road when they're frustrated that it's been 10 years and they haven't got fully paid out yet. Or you just come in and play hardball and just say, hey, this is the value of your business, this is the reality. It's 4.75. I'm willing to do all this, but you're going to have to front whatever the bank wants in terms of their seller note. Maybe they only want 750, and you can come in at 16. This cash flows, you're set. This is going to be delayed to whatever the term of the bank is, and they walk away with all cash, which is kind of the scenario they're after here anyways. Walk away with 4.5. They walk away with 4, so only a little bit different. It's all potential, right? You got to play around with it, but the biggest flag that I see is this: make sure you look at the year over year, last 3 years. Basically, has it been static or slight growth? If yes, it's well set up to take over. If you see this extreme growth, 10, 20% year over year, basically they've got it ready to sell. Now they want to hand you a bag of flaming crap. So that's really what it comes down to. But a really interesting business nonetheless. If you want to see more of these like semi-absentee, absentee style businesses, I'm not going to get into commercial real estate stuff. It's all garbage, as I see it at least. More than happy to dive into it though. Just request